Hello, hi, good afternoon. My name is Rich Stein, and I'll be presenting today on the road north, the Alaska Highway. So, the road north. So why Alaska? I've been riding motorcycles for years throughout the lower 48. I had done numerous cross-country trips and thousands of miles around the West. So it was time for a bigger adventure. And one of the reasons I went up there was my brother was working in Fairbanks at the time. So I thought, well, it might be a nice idea to drop in on him. And plus, I had just gotten a new bike. So why not put it to good use? I'm going to start with some quick facts about Alaska. You might remember some of these from your 7th grade social studies class. But in 1867, the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. That worked out to about 2 cents a mile. What a bargain, right? But even at that price, it was considered Seward's folly. William Seward was the Secretary of State at the time, and he caught a lot of flack for buying it. So it was considered a boondoggle until gold. They found gold up in the Yukon. And so that changed things, and we'll talk about that whole episode after a while. But in 1959, it became the 49th state and is by far the largest state, twice as big as Texas. So there was some early exploration going on, and Alaska and northern Canada, northwest Canada are quite remote and quite rugged. And for centuries, though, Native Alaskans and First Nation tribes traversed the region. They created trails for hunting and trading among their communities. By the 1700s, European explorers came on the scene. Hudson Bay Company came on. They were a big trading outfit. And what's going on is by the late 20s, aviation took off. And there were early flights by bush pilots who had created crude airfields in some of the larger communities, and airmail got its start. They were bringing airmail throughout the territory. In 1931, the Canadian government considered a proposal to spark economic growth. Now remember, this was Depression era, and the Depression hit Canada also. And so imagine that, they had an infrastructure project to stimulate the economy. So when I first considered presenting this topic, I thought I would just dust off some old slides and review the one set of notes that survived all these years. Back in '85, I focused only on route planning. But as I started planning this presentation, I realized I didn't know a whole lot about the highway or the country through which it travels. And the more I read and the more I learned about it, the more intrigued I became with learning more. So I'm going to focus today on two areas. We'll look at the history of the highway, how it came to be. It's got a quite interesting past, and the geography of the highway. So, and during that, I'll recount my trip up the highway. But first, some trivia. So while researching the highway, I came across an interesting item. The highway's got a Chicago connection. There's a gentleman by the name of Slim Williams, and he lived up in the Fairbanks area. He was a trapper. He delivered mail for a while, and he raised sled dogs. And he boasted that his team of wolf dog hybrids could mush all the way from his home to Chicago. So when the proponents of the highway got wind of this boast, they realized that that feat would draw much attention to their cause. And so they basically recruited Slim to make sure he could get down there. So Slim was 51 in November of 1932. He hitched up his 8-dog sled team and began the trip south. And he finally arrived in Chicago, September of 33, almost 10 months after leaving Alaska. And when he got to Chicago in September of 33, you remember the World's Fair was going on. And so he had an exhibit. It was called the Alaska Cabin Exhibit at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. After this, he went on, took his dog team on out to Washington, D.C., and actually met with President Franklin Roosevelt to promote the highway. So 1939, a few years later, Slim did another adventure, this time on motorcycle, with his best friend John Logan there on the right, and his other best friend in the middle. And they proceeded to travel south, blazing a trail again through the wilderness. So here's Slim and his partner embarking on their motorcycle trip. This is a silent film, by the way. So when there's no boat, you got to make a bridge to cross. I don't want to say that this inspired me for my trip, but it's an interesting little piece of history. Now he's making a makeshift log bridge to get across this muskeg swampy area. So there we go. All right. So that was Slim. And so Slim's motorcycle adventure brings us to the end of 1939. And around that time, world events were happening that would further define Alaska's importance. The war in Europe was gaining steam. Great Britain was under attack. Russia was fighting with Germany. And in 1941, FDR signed what was known as the Lend-Lease program. Now, this was a program in which the U.S. provided its allies with food and fuel, arms and materiel, including warships and warplanes. And here's an example of some of those warplanes. We have a light bomber, the B-25, right? Pursuit planes, the C-47. This was a classic airplane of the era. This was the military version of the DC-3. So the question is, how do you get these planes to our allies? And there was this program, within the Lend-Lease program, there were really two components. And the first one was called the Northwest Staging Route. And this was a series of airfields. Some of those were already existing when the airmail deliveries and the bush pilots had created, and there were more airfields created for this staging route. So they had one about every 100, 150 miles for emergency use, okay? So they would fly planes from the lower 48 up through Canada and into Alaska, where they were met by Russian aviators who then flew them on the Alserd route, Alaska, Siberia, over to Russia, which was, as you know, our ally during the World War II. Here's the staging route, just so you can see the length of this thing. They would gather their planes in up in Great Falls, Montana, which was the start of this staging route, and work their way up through all these small airfields into Fairbanks, and then the Russian pilots would meet them at Fairbanks for training, and the Russian mechanics would meet them there for training on how to repair and maintain the aircraft, and then they would fly back into Siberia. I've got another video here that's apropos of that area. So another silent 1 minute, we're showing construction along the Northwest Staging Route, building one of the towers, some runway and airport construction. I believe this is the Watson Lake area. And of course, back then, it was known as the Army Air Force. Fueling the planes, and I want to show you, okay, we have some flight deck. There was about 8,000 aircraft that made the trip up through the Northwest Staging Route. Here we got some of those Russian soldiers, Russian aviators. So we must be in Fairbanks, and they're talking them over. And this kicks, this is like, here we go, wind it up, ready for a flight to Russia. Okay, so again, here's the the Northwest staging route, and take a look at this route. And now the next slide here shows the route of the highway, and look at that, it's almost identical to that Northwest staging route. So that is the basis. The highway, the staging route was the basis for the current day Alaska Highway. So everything changed though on this date. And so the attack on Pearl Harbor and the beginning of the Pacific Theater in World War II, coupled with Japanese threats to the west coast of North America and the Aleutian Islands, changed the priorities for both the US and Canada. So in February of 42, FDR signed an agreement to authorize the Alaska Highway construction. And Canada had some pull in that, but Canada demanded that the US pay the full cost of construction. And they also demanded that after the war ends, that they would become the owner of the Canadian portion of the highway. And of course, the US agreed to that. Canada did contribute resources such as timber and gravel to the effort, right? So there was 3 routes initially considered. And that one that Slim had driven on his motorcycle, which was way on the coast, that was already discounted. That was considered too close to the ocean, to the coast, and it was maybe susceptible to Japanese invasion and bombing. So they settled on another one further inland. They called it the Prairie Route, and you can see it again here, well inland, and it's where we see the highway today. So construction started back on March 9, 1942, basically 2 months after Pearl Harbor. They got it together in 2 months to build this highway. And initially 5 regiments from the Army Corps of Engineers were assigned to do this, including, and this is a little historic comment here, 3 African-American engineering regiments. Now, if you remember, back in the 40s, the Army was still segregated. And so this was a historic occasion that they brought in the African-American regiments to participate in this effort. So from March of 42 when it started, to September of 42, that's, what is that, like not even 9 months to complete what they call the tote road, the first cut through the wilderness to create the highway. Creating the highway, there were numerous construction challenges, and one was route finding. And it started in March. March up in Alaska and northern Canada is still snow cover. So here's a couple of survey crew guys knee deep in snow trying to figure out where to run the highway. And when the snow melts, of course, you're knee deep in mud. And this was the situation back then. There was also you can see this tarp they had as kind of a windbreak on top of a ridge line here, trying to protect their equipment. Permafrost, you may have heard this term, permafrost, permanently frozen ground. And it can be, it's subsurface, meaning below the surface, covered by vegetation, covered by non-frozen soil, which acts as an insulating quality to the permafrost. Once you start building a road and scraping off that cover, that vegetation, you can wind up with something that looks like this. It's muskeg, which is that frozen permafrost melting and resulting in a bog, a swamp like this. And so if you're trying to build a road, one of the techniques that they put into place was called a corduroy road. And you can see these guys bringing these logs into this swampy area to try and build up the surface such that you can get a Jeep or trucks across that that former permafrost. Bridge building, there are numerous stream crossings along the length of the highway. And they range in size from fairly narrow creeks like this to huge rivers we'll see shortly. So you can bring in some heavy equipment and construct bridges that way, or just a lot of manual labor like these guys are doing. Here's a technique that was put into place, and it's called a pontoon bridge. And you can see on the foreground here, it looks like a series of rowboats that are all lashed together. And then they put some timbers and constructed a temporary road across those small boats. So that was in place while they built the larger bridge we see in the background here. And by the way, this is, I found a whole series of old postcards like this, and we'll be seeing a lot of those during the course. And there was also weather conditions and the extremes, well, sub-zero temperatures to very high temperatures. Wildlife was present. There were bears throughout and bugs. If you've been to Alaska, you may know that in the spring and the summer, it's mosquito country, and little gnats are up there. It can be very annoying. Now, just close that construction with this shot again. This is classic. They're trying to get up the hill through that mud. You even got a bulldozer trying to push the trucks out of the way. But you can see on the right here, you can see those corduroy roads. And this one was in place trying to get up this small grade. Okay, so the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built what they call the tote road. They did that in 9 months. And after that time, the Public Roads Administration, which is the forerunner of today's Department of Transportation, the PRA came in and refined the road. They improved the road. They straightened out certain segments. They paved over or re-corduroyed the road in places. And so that construction, that ongoing construction continues today. There's still permafrost under a good portion of the highway, and that needs to be taken care of. So these two photos on the right are mine from when I was up there. You can see road closed here, the gravel piles, and they're grading a stretch of road. This is a more current photo, and it still continues. And it continues because of things like this, that permafrost through the annual freeze-thaw cycles can result in huge cracks along the embankment. And the permafrost can also result in frost heaves, like you can see the roller coaster effect here. This is fairly minor. This one's a little more severe. Now, when we say Alaska Highway, let me point out, highway is maybe misleading. It's not like any interstate highway that we are familiar with down here. It's 2-lane all the way, and so I'm going to show you just a few generic photos along the length of the highway right here. But it's 2-lane. It's paved mostly, and you got a shoulder. Maybe you got a paved shoulder of some width, and but these are representative of what the highway looks like for its entire length. Okay, so once again, here's the map. Dawson Creek is the mile, what they call mile 0, and it extends up officially to Delta Junction, almost 1,400 miles, and then Fairbanks is just another 100 or so miles beyond that. Just for comparison, 1,400 miles, if you went from Chicago down to Miami, that's 1,400 miles. So if you can visualize that trip, that distance, might give you a feel for the length of time. But before you get to the Alaska Highway, before you can ride the Alaska Highway, you got to get to it. And at the time, 1985, I was living in Denver. And so here's my route from Denver up to Dawson Creek. I'm not going to go into any detail other than it's a gorgeous scenic ride through Yellowstone and the Canadian National Parks. Banff and Jasper are up here. And then that trip took me 6 days to get up to the start of the highway. And how I got there was on this vehicle. This was a 1985 BMW. If you're familiar with motorcycles at all, you know BMW is considered the classic long distance road bike. and I had got a R80, that's an 800cc motorcycle, drive shaft, right? So virtually maintenance free. I added some riding lights and side bags, and hit the road. So day one from Dawson Creek up to Fort Nelson. And before you hit the road, let me just put a plug in here for this publication. This is the milepost. It's called the Alaska Travel Planner. If you're going riding the Alaska Highway, or for that matter, any highway in Alaska or Northwest Canada, this is the publication you want to consult before you go on your trip and while you're on your trip. It's a mile by mile accounting of what to expect up in Alaska. So there's the current day version, and this orange one here is my 1985 copy. So beginning, Dawson Creek, mile 0. Dawson Creek is a prairie town. It's an agricultural, small farming community, kind of in the eastern midway up British Columbia. And it was founded back in 1879. Sleepy little town until the highway came through. I mentioned this was the railhead. Dawson Creek was the railhead of a lot of Canadian railways, meaning the train ended right there. So it became a logical place to bring in all the heavy equipment and all the troops that were needed to build the highway. And so it kind of had some boomtown growth going back there in the 40s. Here's the mile 0 milepost in the center of town here at the crossroads. And that's a shot of that upper portion. Now, the mileposts, they originally put mileposts, I don't know if it was every mile, but every so often. And I'm going to show those as part of the subtitle on these slides, just to give you a feel for how they go. I should mention also, there's a distinction now anymore between the current milepost and what's known as the historic milepost. And that's because through the years, as the highway got straightened or rerouted, the mileage changed. And here we are leaving town, and you can see the signpost there indicates that it's in British Columbia, it's known as Highway 97. So not too far out of town, 17 miles out of town here, we run across this Cascatinor Bridge. Now, I'll mention this is no longer part of the official Alaska Highway. And it's like the first instance we see where the highway's been rerouted from its initial construction. It was built in 42. It took 9 months to build. Here's a photo from that era. And here's another close-up of how it looks today. It's still in use. However, again, not part of the official highway. Now, let me show you on the map here what we got. So in the yellow line, you can see Highway 97. Here's the official highway. And with this white road taken off right here is the former route of the Alaska Highway. And so that bridge, here's a little drone shot I found. We're looking kind of northeast, downstream and across the arc of that bridge. Here's the current bridge. So that this was in use actually in 1985 when I rode over it. A little further down the road, we come across the Peace River Bridge. Now, here's another one of those old postcards that I came across. And this Peace River Bridge was built back in 1943. Here's another piece of trivia for you. John Roebling, anybody know that name? John Roebling was a gentleman who built the Brooklyn Bridge. He did that, I think the Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883. So amazing. He was still around in 43 to help design or help build this one. This is no longer in existence. This collapsed in 57. And I have one more video.
It's a $4 million suspension bridge across the Peace River in British Columbia, but part of the framework has buckled and bent. Any minute now, as the amateur cameraman who was on the spot realized, there's going to be a crack-up. Any second now. Just watch. A fault in construction, metal fatigue, or what? That remains to be discovered, and the bridge remains to be rebuilt.
Okay, so there we go. So it collapsed in 53, whatever, and so here's the new bridge constructed in 1960. Maybe not a what do you call it, a suspension bridge, but still a nice looking structure. And by the way, that red and white structure you see in the background there, that's a natural gas pipeline. It's got its own suspension bridge there, but that's how they're getting that gas across the river. Hey, look at this, Suicide Hill. This was again, we talked about a rough cut for that first tote road that the engineers made. This is a pretty rough cut right here. This has got a slope about 32%. And, you know, that's something that you might find in an amusement park rather than on a highway. It's clearly no longer in existence. This was like one of the first pieces of the highway to be upgraded. So just a little historic fact there. The Sakani River Bridge. Look at this postcard. But we see here, that's probably like the first cut, in other words, the pontoon bridge right there. And then the newer bridge, this was probably a commemorative postcard. Here's another shot from that time. And look at the detail on some of this timber truss work again. Now this I wrote over because this was still in existence in 85. But what happened here was in 1990, arson. For whatever reason, somebody decided to burn it down. And so here's the current bridge, just a kind of everyday looking crossing. Okay, Tretch Mountain. Now, this is the gorgeous, flat, smooth, wide stretch of highway as it exists today. Unfortunately, it didn't exist in 1985. And what we did in 1985, the highway made it up and over Tretch Mountain here. Back in construction days, this was considered, you can see the low-lying area, so there's a drainage across. This was considered too much of an ordeal to try and make a bridge or cross it, however. So they decided it was easier to go up and over the mountain for some distance and then come down on the other side, probably on this ridge line here. This road still exists. It's still open, and there are oil fields and natural gas wells up on top of this Tretch Mountain, so that's still in use. Coming into Fort Nelson. And this is Fort Nelson is a major stopover on the highway. It was an actual fort created back in 1805 by the Northwest Fur Trading Company. It was one of the first communities to have an airport established, and was the main stop along the Northwest staging area. So I made it just past Fort Nelson there to this campground on the Tetsa River and called it a day. Called it day one. Day two. So continuing on from Fort Nelson towards Watson Lake. And the first thing we encounter is Summit Pass. Now this is the highest point on the highway, 4,250 feet elevation. And you can see the caribou grazing along the highway. The highway is sparsely traveled, certainly in the late summer, early fall part of the year that I was up there. Sparsely traveled, and the whole region is sparsely populated. So wildlife is prevalent, and they they really don't scatter when they see cars or people coming. A little ways down the road, Muncho Lake. And so I pulled over. It was lunchtime. I decided to take a break. And when I was putting this presentation together, I said, well, this might be a good time to take a break and talk about what's on the bike, or how to pack for 5 weeks on 2 wheels. So let me run down what you see on that bike there. So you got a skinny blue duffel bag. That's my tent. It's a 2-person, 3-season tent. The other duffel bag's got my sleeping bag and a ground pad. The backpack here, I got change of clothes. I got some sneakers. The left saddle bag was my kitchen. I had a 1-burner Coleman stove. I got the fuel bottles, mess kit, everything you need to have fine dining in the wilderness. In the right bag, food, gourmet meals, instant oatmeal, canned soup, granola bars. I threw some tools in there just in case. Up in the tank bag was my rain suit. I used that more than I would have hoped. Gloves, a sweater, sunglasses, my copy of the milepost. And every day I had my riding boots, jeans, my leathers, gloves, and of course a helmet. So the Lower Lillard Bridge, this is the only remaining suspension bridge on the highway, built back in '43. And there's an interesting history of this bridge, or rather the materials that went into this bridge. Some of you guys may have heard of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington. It collapsed in 1940. It collapsed due to some faulty engineering work. Well, somehow the guys who built this bridge got their hands on some of the steel from that Tacoma Narrows Bridge, brought it out to British Columbia and used it to build this bridge. So I don't know, had I known that before I rode over it, I don't know if I would have been a little more leery about that, but nevertheless, it's still in existence. And just down the road is the Lillard River Hot Springs Provincial Park. Now, this is the largest natural springs in Canada. And it's open year-round. And interestingly, even though it's located in a boreal forest climate, this immediate area is so humid and so damp that there are 14 varieties of orchids found here. Contact Creek. This is the famous site where soldiers from the 35th Regiment, the Colored Regiment, and the 340th, the White Regiment, met at this previously unnamed creek and made contact. Contact Creek today, pretty much just a wide spot on the road. And it was actually a construction camp during the construction of the highway, but anymore it's just a camping lodge, camping grounds and a lodge. Lower Post is a First Nation community. It was originally a trading post back in the 1870s and taken over by the Hudson Bay Company. But now it's a First Nation tribal community, and one of the landing strips on the Northwest staging route was in here. I'm going to talk about wildlife again because I mentioned they're prevalent throughout the highway. This was on the way up. This was a herd of Bighorn sheep, and I passed them. They didn't scatter. I had to like crawl through the herd, pulled over on the shoulder and looked back and got this photograph. Bear. Now this is not my photo, but nevertheless, it's indicative of the proximity that bears can make to humans. Bison. I was kind of like put off for a minute. I always thought bison were prairie animals, and yet, it's fairly well forested up through the highway, and yet we still see a large number of bison, as well as a large number of moose. Here's the Alaska state bird. This is the ptarmigan, the willow ptarmigan. Here's it's in summer, its summer look, and its winter attire. And I mentioned earlier about the mosquitoes. They're known affectionately as the unofficial Alaska state bird, the mosquito. Okay, this is my favorite photo. I think this just says it all to me here. Milepost 607. It's the first time that we crossed the Yukon border. The highway kind of dips in and out of Yukon and BC a few times, but this was the first crossing. I want to point out this sign just so we can refer to it later on, but take a look at that sign for the minute. Now, after I had done the trip and talking about it, people always ask me, well, hey, was it hard to find a gas station on the highway? And no, it's not hard to find a gas station. Finding gas might be a little more of a problem. This was a relic from back in the day. But this kind of relates to current day, because when I was reading the milepost, the current edition of the milepost, and I told you it was like a mile by mile accounting of what to expect. In other words, where to find gas stations. In the 2020 edition, they also make note of where to find electric charging stations. So, I mean, think about that. That's the current problem. If you're driving your Prius up the highway, you might want to know where you can plug it in at night. And currently, looking through the current edition of the milepost, there is really only 2 stations. Whitehorse has one, and Haines Junction has one. So I don't know what you're going to do in between those sites. Okay, so we come upon Watson Lake, and you may recognize this tower from that video we saw, where they were actually constructing that tower back in 1942. It still exists, and it's still in use. It's still the airport, the official airport control tower for Watson Lake Airport, and recently designated as a heritage site. So, all this talk about airfields and the staging area and moving aircraft up and down, I never showed you any kind of airfields. So let's do that now. This is Watson Lake, the airport at Watson Lake. And they do have the occasional commercial flights, mostly, private planes that use this. And here it is, look how it looked back in the day. But this is the real reason people come to Watson Lake. And it all started with this guy. This guy was an engineer building a highway back in 42, and he got a little lonesome for his hometown. So he put up a sign, and he put the mileage, how far it was to Dayton, Ohio, wherever he might have been from. And that has expanded. Here's 1985, when I was there. Here's how it looked. Everyone passing through brings their hometown sign. And here's how it exists today. It's a veritable forest of signposts. So I made it on just past Watson Lake, found a campground, set up my tent right there, set up my stove, and had dinner, probably a can of soup, and went out for an evening stroll. And when I came back, I found these guys also out for their evening stroll. A couple of bison just meandering through the camp. So day three, Watson Lake, and we made it on up to Kalani Lake. And the first thing we do is cross the Continental Divide. Now, I want to point out here, this is not the same Continental Divide that we see in the lower 48. It's not separating the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. This one is separating the Pacific and the Arctic Ocean. And if you read the sign, it divides the Yukon River watershed and the Mackenzie River watershed. And we'll talk about the Yukon in a minute, but the Mackenzie actually flows north through most of Canada and ends up in the Arctic Ocean. And I also want to point out this bicycle. My hat's off to the person riding this bicycle. It takes a whole lot more fortitude than it did to ride a motorcycle up the highway. So the Yukon River, let's talk about that. It's huge. It's the third longest river in North America. Now, if I was doing this live face to face, I might pose the question, well, anyone know the first two largest rivers in North America? So the first one would be the Mississippi-Missouri river system, and the second one would be the Mackenzie, which originates way down south, actually in the Peace River, where we crossed that bridge many miles ago. But the Yukon, the watershed here in the inset map, you can see is this brown area. Looks about a third of the state of Alaska plus a good chunk of Yukon. And on this map, you can see the main stem with many of the prime major tributaries. So it starts south of Whitehorse. And it's interesting, it's navigable from the Bering Strait all the way upstream to Whitehorse. And that'll play into our next slide, or we're in a few slides here. Okay, all right, and this just shows the highway. So it doesn't really, the highway doesn't really parallel the Yukon. It crosses it once, and then we pick up the tributary, the Tanana River, into Fairbanks. This Sutton Bay Bridge, it's the longest water span on the highway. Now, I say water span and not river crossing because we're not really crossing the river at this point. This is the Nisutlan River at its confluence with the Teslin River, and so it's really a huge bay, a huge body of water, 1,900 some odd feet for the span. But this bridge is being considered. It's a gorgeous bridge, by the way. You can see these 7 trestles that make up the span, and it's being considered for a joint agreement between the government of Yukon and one of the native, one of the First Nation tribes, the Teslin Tlingit tribe, to either rehab or replace that bridge, hopefully in the next couple of years. All right, the Knik Pipeline. Now here's another piece of Alaska highway history that when I wrote it in '85, I had no idea that it existed and what it is was a pipeline. Okay, so back in the early '40s when they were building the Northwest staging route and they had all these airfields, it was like, okay, so the airplanes would be stopping presumably for fuel, maybe they need oil. Where's all that oil and fuel coming from? Well, they discovered up here in Norman Wells, up here in Northwest Territories, that there were oil fields up here. And so the decision was made to, well, let's build a pipeline. And if you build a pipeline, well, you need a road alongside it so you can access it. And so that was a whole other project. It's 513 miles from this junction here outside of Whitehorse up to Norman Wells. Now, what they did was it was like a 4-inch pipeline, and they could get away with such a small diameter because the oil was of such I guess the term would be low viscosity, that it would flow easily and wouldn't freeze up in such a small pipe. However, the output of those wells was not what they had hoped it would be. It was like 3,000 barrels a day. So they said, well, that's not enough. It's not worth our time to maintain this pipeline, even though they had brought a refinery up from Texas and rebuilt it outside of Whitehorse. So that was a bust. And plus it leaked a lot, apparently. So they didn't want to do that. And I have this photograph. This guy, either he's checking for leaks or he's tying his shoe. It's really not clear what he's doing there. But anyway, here's the junction from the Alaska Highway. This is the road into up the canal. Now you can see here's an example of the historic milepost marker, which differs from the actual current day milepost. Just down the road, I'm riding down the road. I'm saying, wow, here's another gorgeous stretch of straight, smooth highway. And if it wasn't for this sign over here, I wouldn't even know I was crossing the river. So here's the Teslin River, major stream in the Yukon. So you get off the bike and you go down the embankment, and this is what that bridge looks like from below. Nice looking structure. And we come into Whitehorse. Now, Whitehorse is the largest city in northern Canada. It became the capital of the Yukon back in 1950. And interestingly, it's the driest city in Canada, 6 inches of rain, right? That's almost desert quality, and 55 inches of snow. So that's caused by the rain shadow effect. If Whitehorse is on the eastern side of the coast mountains. And so all that moist Pacific air flowing across butts up against the coast mountains, right? And then dumps all this precip in the mountains, and there's nothing left, no rain, no moisture left to fall in Whitehorse. Whitehorse has got some history, and as when it comes to the gold rush, and it's we're going to talk about the Chilkoot Pass here in a minute. But Whitehorse is actually a transportation hub, and so I mentioned earlier the Yukon River. It's the head of navigation. You can get a boat 2,000 miles downstream to the Bering Sea. It's also, there was a railroad that was put through over one of the passes around just in time for the gold rush, and it ended from at Whitehorse. So it became a quite the transportation nexus. But I'm going to take a minute here and talk about the gold up in Yukon, up in Dawson City, which was the main point where you would go to work your way up to the various canyons. So there's three ways really to get to Dawson City, and one was considered the all Canada route, and you can see that here going on land through Alberta, BC, Yukon. It was the most arduous way to get there. There was no road. There was not even a trail. You were pretty much bushwhacking the entire time. If you had a sled dog or if you had a horse probably wouldn't make it. So you did what you could to get there. And once you got into Yukon, you could get the river and float down the river to Dawson City. The other way, they called it the all water route from Seattle. And this was kind of the life of leisure, because you could just sail up to St. Michael, which was the mouth of the Yukon, and then get on a paddle boat and work your way upstream all the way to Dawson City. This was the easiest, but clearly the most expensive, and also the longest, and also you had to time it right, because if you left Seattle too late in the year, then by the time you got to Yukon, you could be susceptible to that river freezing over, and you'd be stuck somewhere on the middle of the river. So the compromise route was up through Skagway. Again, it left Seattle, and you took a boat through the inland passage up to Seattle. You would then offload all your gear and head up and over Chilkoot Pass, and then down the pass, and then eventually to Whitehorse, where you could grab another steamer and go down to Dawson City. But you remember back when we first came into Yukon, I showed you this sign I pointed out those silhouettes. Well, here's the significance of that. This is Chilkoot Pass, and these are all your hopeful miners heading up over Chilkoot on their way to the gold fields. Now, you see what's on their back. Looks like pretty heavy backpacks and gear that they're hauling up. Here's the thing. The international border, the Canadian-US border, is at the top of the ridge here. Canadian customs realized that there was a whole bunch of foreigners coming into their country trying to find gold. And they didn't want those foreigners to be stuck in Canada if they didn't find any gold and ran out of supplies. So they required all these guys to bring a year's worth of food and provisions with them to be allowed entry into Canada. So a year's worth of food, somebody calculated what that would actually look like, what that would weigh. And it was about a ton of food and provisions, 2,000 pounds. So if you think about, well, what can you carry on your back up over a snow-covered mountain pass? Maybe 50, 60 pounds. So there would be numerous trips that these guys would make up the pass to the border, drop their load, come back down, get another load, do the math, 2,000 pounds by 50 pounds per trip. So there were some entrepreneurs in the area. And you can see this cable, and there's some cables here with some support poles over here. They decided they would build some tramways, right? And so they would be down at the base of the pass and saying, hey, you know, we'll put your gear in this tramway thing, and we can just haul it up to the top. So they were trying to make a few bucks off the miners that way. But assuming that you got all your gear either by yourself or in the tramway, you then went down to the other side and made your way to Whitehorse and proceeded to make your fortune in the gold mine. And one of the ways you got down from Whitehorse to Dawson City on the Yukon River would have been on the SS Klondike or a similar boat. And this was the original one of the original paddle wheelers that ran the river. It's now on land as a National Historic Site. This is the original. This is the SS Klondike 1. Unfortunately, ran aground or ran into a rock somewhere and submerged. So this was reconstructed, the SS Klondike 2, and it's like I say, on dry land as a museum. But all that transportation in Whitehorse is a good place to put the Yukon Transportation Museum. And you can't miss this. This is right off the highway going through Whitehorse, right next to the airport. And front and center on that museum is this old DC-3. And again, this thing was a C-47 cargo transport plane back during the war, converted to civilian use in 47. Canadian Pacific Airlines had it and then retired it in 1970. And for better or for worse, it is now a wind vane. So, okay, leaving Whitehorse, right down the road, we come across Champagne Landing, another town bypassed when the highway was rerouted in 2002. It's another tribal community. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that. And we get down to Haines Junction. Now, Haines Junction is a major spot on the highway only because it's the only way to get down to Haines, Alaska. It's the only road to Haines, Alaska, from which you can catch a ferry and go out to all the other small towns in the southeast Alaska panhandle. But Haines Junction, clearly some gorgeous scenery. I was riding through town and I passed this little Our Lady of the Way church. I said, well, isn't that cute? Look at those flowers. Let me get off and look around the other side. So you go around to the side, and this is what it looks like. It's an old Quonset hut back from construction days, repurposed. And we get to the Slims River and the Slims River Bridge. So I stopped in the middle of the span and looked upstream and got this shot of the coast mountains and the snow-covered mountains. And there's a lot of glacial activity up there, which is what feeds the Slim River. That bridge is no longer in existence. This is what it used to look like. And it's now just a causeway. But let me take a minute and show you what's going on. And again, I just came across this this information in the last month or so doing the research. But here's a map of Kalani National Park, where headwaters of Kalani Lake. And here's the highway, this red line coming across. So that preceding photograph from the bridge, here's the viewpoint. I was shooting upstream towards these mountains, okay? Here's what it looks like in 2010. And you can see the bridge is gone. We just got a causeway. And that point of view is from looking southeast now, okay? But here's the thing. Currently, this is what the river looks like. Currently, for the last couple of years, it's looked like this. It's basically dried up. And why is that? Well, you can see this glacier, right, is feeding the Sims River. And the Sims River is a fairly short river, just from the glacier into the lake, okay? But there's another runoff from the glacier, and that goes over this way. Let me get another map here. It should be a little clearer. So is the glacier, what's happening is the glacier is receding. And you can attribute this to climate change or not, but the point is it's receding to the point where water no longer runs off into the Slims River and therefore no longer feeds Kalani Lake. And we got here's the divide, basically the divide. So when that glacier was extended, when the toe of the glacier crossed the divide, runoff would feed the lake. Due to the recession, it only feeds this Casper River, which, being across the divide, runs into the Pacific Ocean. So just a little climate change warning there. It's going to severely affect the lake levels. It's going to impact fish and wildlife. So but when I was there, I found a campground along the shore of Kalani Lake and spent the third night looking at this view. Here's the lake again. So day 4 from Kalani Lake, making the final push up into Fairbanks. And we come to Soldiers Summit. Now this is of historic significance. This is where back in November 20th, 1942, this was the ribbon cutting ceremony. This is where they officially opened the Alaska Highway. And so they got a little plaque and tribute over here with both the flags. And we go nearby, there's this attraction called, Through the Years, where you can see basically 3 different iterations of the Alaska Highway. And so this track up the hill here looks more like a hiking trail. This might have been part of the original tote road that was created. And this nice looking 2-track in front of us would have been the PRA coming in and reconfiguring it and widening it. And then the original, the current day road is down along the shoreline. Destruction Bay, I really don't remember this. This is the highway here. I probably just blew through here, but I included this to show some of the drawdown on the lake already. In the 3-4 years that the Slims River is not running into the lake, we can see the reduction in the water level. And so what used to be a boat launch ramp here, kind of sitting high and dry. Destruction Bay, it's got nothing to do with the water level. This got its name way back during the construction days because there was severe windstorms, the story goes. that blew down a whole bunch of the structures that were in existence back then. And we come to Beaver Creek. Beaver Creek's claim to fame, it's the most western town in Canada. It's also a First Nation community. And we get to the actual border crossing, the US port of entry. Be sure to set your clocks back. You leave Pacific time and you go into Alaska time when you cross the border. Now, how do you know you crossed the border? Well, you look for the international border right here, which is this 141st meridian. It's a 20-foot clear cut, 10 foot on either side of the actual border line. And it's maintained by the International Boundary Commission. And that commission is charged with maintaining that clear cut, maintaining all the border monuments. And if you've ever wondered how you can locate a line of latitude, they're all over the globe, but you don't see them until you come to a place like this. And clearly that's the 141st west longitude meridian right there. And the official welcome to Alaska sign. And the first town in Alaska is Northway. And I didn't do much here except stop. Here's another gas pump, and made my way to on down the road to Tok. Tok, we're in Alaska, and it's another junction site. You can take the highway down to Anchorage and Valdez. But here's the thing. So there's a tourist information center with a big public lands exhibit. And me, if you like maps, here's one showing all of federally owned land. 62% of Alaska is federally owned land. The state owns another 25%, and tribal land for 10. So these various shaded polygons, you see Park Service, Denali is out over here somewhere, Forest Service down in the Panhandle, BLM and Fish and Wildlife is everywhere. So yeah, it's pretty easy to get around. I mean, in other words, public land, it's all open. You may need a permit, but it's all accessible. And finally, Delta Junction. Here's this guy standing in front of the end of the highway sign. Now, when I was there, I saw this little statue, whatever you want to call it here, and I had no clue what that was. I probably read the inscription, but really didn't pursue it. Well, now I know what it is, and we have a monument to the 3 pipelines that were existing in Alaska, that made Alaska. So up here we got the canal, the 3-inch canal pipeline. There was another pipeline from Haines. So in other words, tankers would pull up to Haines and discharge, offload their oil, pipe it up over the pass into Whitehorse. And this larger one, the 4-foot diameter, is the current Alaska pipeline. So here it is. This is, of course, finished in 1977. It's bringing oil from the North Slope, right, from up there on the Arctic Ocean area, all the way south to Valdez. And it parallels the highway for a little ways and then crosses the Tanana River here on this huge suspension bridge. Okay, so we get up to Fairbanks, and I'm gonna call it Trails End, and it's the end of the highway. It's the end of my portion of that adventure, and it was also the location of Trails End BMW. And this is where I stopped in and met the owner slash head mechanic slash head curmudgeon, George Ron. Spent a day or so with him as we did some maintenance on the bike. He insisted I help, unlike most bike shops. So this guy was great. but he got me ready. He got the bike ready for the rest of my trip, which is not part of this presentation, but which I'll show you just so you know where I went here. So from Fairbanks, Nenana, which is the turnoff for Denali National Park, down through into Anchorage, beyond the end of the road at Homer on the Kenai Peninsula, and back up to Tok on the official highway down to Haines Junction, and then the Haines cutoff down to Haines, where I got a ferry to Juneau, spent a few days in Juneau, got the larger ferry then all the way down to Seattle, and made my way down the coast and back to Denver. So there you have it, riding the Alaska Highway. So hope you liked it. Thanks. I'll take any questions, I guess, or comments if you have any.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rich. That was terrific.
Thank you.
So we have some questions from our audience. Would you mind unsharing your screen?
Yeah, you're back. Okay.
Thank you so much. All right, let's hop into them. Did you meet others as you drove along the highway, or was it pretty desolate?
So I left Denver, it was late August. I got to Fairbanks on Labor Day, actually, of '85. There was other traffic. It was not by any means congested. And interestingly, as I was riding up, most of that traffic was already coming down. You know, all the RVs, people were spending the summer, I guess, summer's over, so they were on their way back already. So yeah, it was later in the season.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the temperature like during your ride? And that's a separate question.
It was tolerable. I mean, I was wearing gloves all the time, but I wear gloves when I ride anyway. I was layered up, leather jacket, sweater, t-shirt. So the actual temperature would have been 50s, 40s, perhaps. I don't think I got much. I don't remember any freezing temperatures. Yeah.
Did you always find a park area to set up your tent in, or did you sometimes just set up along the road?
There were official campgrounds. There were like either the provincial or city-owned campgrounds. They were prevalent, so it was not a problem. Yeah, I don't remember any incident where I just had to make do on the side of the road. And I should add, there was the occasional motel. Certainly Fairbanks, I was in a motel. Haines, when I got back to that part, Anchorage, the bigger cities, a chance to do some wash and stock up on some food and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Is the highway drivable in winter? And is the highway easier to drive in late summer, or the cracks, frost, etc., equally difficult all year?
It's open year round, and meaning it's maintained year round. So I don't know if they would plow the entire length of it, but they would. It's certainly open, and if you're chained up or it should be okay. It wasn't that much of a concern to me because I didn't encounter any winter conditions on it.
What are the speed limits and how are they enforced?
Speed limits? Speed limits. Being sparsely populated and sparsely traveled, you ride what's safe, right? So 65, I think, was the limit. I remember seeing one of the signs. But again, you got wildlife. I mean, so you just can't coming around curves or congested or congested area. You might want to tone it down. But no, I mean, you can't just be, and there are troopers that patrol, and they don't take, I got to tell you, I encountered one. So it was, they don't take kindly to flagrant violation.
How concerned were you with having mechanical issues with your motorcycle?
Hey,
Because
it's a BMW. I was not concerned.
okay.
Yeah, no, certainly the only thing would be a flat tire. That would be my that was always in the back of my head. Oh God, what am I gonna do? I mean, I had a flat kit, but yeah, but no problems whatsoever mechanically. Yeah.
How did you decide to make this trip, and have you made other similar trips?
Well, again, it was just an extension from riding for years, in the lower 48, and it was just an outgrowth of that. It was a bigger adventure. And again, I mentioned my brother working in Fairbanks. I thought I'd go up and see him. Why not? That's a reason to do it. And by the way, I never did find him. He had left prior to my arrival in Fairbanks. So I was like, oh well, yeah. But yeah, that was the main reason. Just do an adventure. Why not? And have I done anything similar? Not to that, not in that 5-week time frame, but yeah, just I continued riding all through the 48. Yeah.
What was your favorite spot on this trip?
Ooh. Um, on the trip itself, on the Alaska Highway. So I'd have to say along Kalani Lake. I guess you could look up on the map. That's a huge lake. I hope it's still huge. There's just no more water feeding that lake. But it's gorgeous and it's huge, and it's a huge wildlife area. Most of Alaska. I mean, I don't know if you can pinpoint it. I mean, it's Alaska. It's gorgeous, and the Yukon. It's gorgeous country. So if you ever get the chance, has any of the audience actually been there, done the trip, or been to that part of the country?
Actually, yeah. So we have a comment from Jeff Wise, and he says, looks
yeah.
like a lot of paved highway by 1985. It was all gravel in 1970 when I took it. My question is, can Mount Logan be seen from the highway?
Mount Logan. He's going to have to remind me where exactly Mount Logan is. But as far as paved, in 85, it was maybe 80% paved. Certainly the lower portions in BC. Yukon, there was a lot of that chip seal gravel effect. And the portion in Alaska has been paved for I'll say forever, but for the longest time.
Cheryl Spence says, did you get to see the Northern Lights? I was in Valdez in 89 and got to see them.
Yeah, no, I did not. No.
Was there any fishing along the way?
I didn't partake, but again, a lot of those lakes, I believe, are stocked and fishable.
And what camera did you use?
I had a Nikon, what the hell model? FM, I believe, small SLR, 35 mil. Yeah, had a couple of lenses with me. Worked fine.
And did you feel that there were plenty of places to restock on groceries or restaurants along the way?
Yeah, I found a can of soup whenever I needed one. It was, yeah, well, all the major towns. And by major town, Fort Nelson, Watson Lake, Whitehorse, Haines Junction. Yeah, there were grocery stores as we know them. So yeah, again, I guess every few days, whenever I would need a resupply, not just on the canned goods, but whatever fresh vegetables I might find. So yeah, picked it up as needed. So no, not a problem on finding food.
That's good. The Northwest staging route seems like it might be a dangerous or arduous route for transfer of planes and material. Do you know if there was a significant loss of people or planes during this effort?
Yeah, there were crashes. There was loss of life. I can't give you numbers on either, but I know adverse weather conditions would be a detriment to trying to fly. So yeah, there were some mishaps up there. But I mean, altogether, it was almost 8,000 aircraft made that journey from Great Falls all the way up to Fairbanks and beyond. And so that, I mean, that's a significant amount of material to get up there. And then of course they would fly, you know, all those pilots that flew the planes. Once they got to Fairbanks, now they got to transport those pilots back to Great Falls to make another run with other planes. And so there's always a back and forth flow of aircraft.
Mhm.